I have 5
All right, I'd
minutes.
like to call to order the June 10th Legislative Committee meeting. Can we take a roll call, please, Heidi?
Yes. Member Childress. Chair Desart.
Here.
Vice Chair Galassi.
Here.
Member Deacon Garcia.
Here.
Member Ozak.
Here.
Member Schwarzy.
Okay. Approval of the minutes. I move to approve 25-0758, the legislative minutes
Second.
from the regular meeting Tuesday, February 2025. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
All right.
Aye. All right. Any opposed? Okay. Chair's remarks. We just have, I'm so thrilled to have our lobbyists here. We've got Mark Polis on Zoom. We've got Chip Hume here. Where's Chip? There you are. Come to our table. Come. And we also have our federal lobbyist, Greg Bales is here as well. I want to get right into it. Our discussion, first of all, the end of session wrap up from our DuPage County State lobbyists. So just to reintroduce, this is State Lobbyist Chip Humes is with Mark Horton Humes. He has served DuPage County for more than 5 years. Chip has more than 15 years of experience though, working, I'm sorry?
I was saying my angle on Zoom is terrible, sorry.
I never would have stood at that end of the table. Well, anyway, Chip has 15 years experience working with legislatures on both the state and federal level, and he works in a bipartisan manner to get the job done. On Zoom is Mark Polis. He's with Rauchi Sullivan Strategies. Mark, I wasn't sure who was going to be here, Mark or Dave. So I've got both little bios, but Mark has served as a member of the Governor Pritzker's transition team and previously spent many years managing the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 150, Labor Management and Government Affairs Operations. So welcome both of you. Chip, if you could kind of do a rundown of what happened in Springfield.
Sure, so I'm certain you all have gone it with a fine tooth comb through that 17-page
Fine-tooth.
session update at the end, but I'll just go through some of the highlights and then obviously happy to take any questions and certainly happy to take any extra ones offline. It's good to be with you. It's good to be back from Springfield. Not that I don't love Springfield, but it's good to be back in DuPage County in my own bed. So speaking for Mark on the Zoom, I think the county overall had a pretty successful session. We were able to, in a very, very tough budget year, get all of our capital reappropriated. So it's all the CRC funding, the initial 5 million, and there was some additional that members had allocated over the last year or two was reappropriated. And also, Jeremy can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of our, we had some wastewater projects, large scale ones, one of which I believe is in process right now. Those projects were reappropriated. So like I said, very tough budget year. General Assembly did finally adjourn just around 2 a.m. on June 1st. Before the stroke of midnight, though, they did pass a budget, revenue package, and a capital plan. So kind of the whole suite that normally is the budget. The budget was a little tight this year. This is the state's first post-COVID money budget, so post-ARPA money. And it was a tight budget year. So they went through a revenue package. They increased taxes on vapes, cigarette tax, pretty solid tax on sports betting companies. Then there was some other kind of nuanced taxes throughout there, no income tax increase, anything like that, to get the budget to what they say is balanced, right?
So they're mostly backdoor taxes.
Yeah, I would say that, like things that probably, they call them sin taxes, you know, they call them voluntary taxes, things you don't have to choose to purchase in large part. So that was accomplished. Small Medicaid omnibus, which is normal cleanup. There was a pension omnibus, was not the tier 2 fix that folks were looking for with the pension enhancements. This was more interoperability of funds, very little limited fiscal impact. It was actually passed bipartisanly, which is interesting for any budget, or I'm sorry, any pension legislation that goes through. The fire drill of the session was, of course, transit.
Yeah.
And transit, as you all know, is something that we have been working through and I would say negotiating for about a year. There have been various public meetings throughout the state, kind of like what they call the listening tour. The Illinois Senate and Chair Ron Villavlam was the one that was spearheading that. So he did his due diligence over the summer. We participated. I think we hosted one here in DuPage at the Naperville City Hall. And over the course of time, eventually the language dropped. The language dropped a couple days before the end of session. It was the Senate version. We had a couple of meetings. It was the Collars and Labor, who were the last two kind of remaining holdouts, I would say, on the conceptual language. And I would say, I shouldn't have used the word holdout. I think we just had probably some of the more major concerns. Because our fear all along was funding a system that is going to have a fiscal cliff, but then the collars will be largely dismissed in the governance. And that was our concern. So when the governance had been negotiated fairly significantly, got to a place I think we could live with. But when the language dropped, there was a poison pill in there for us, which was the elimination of our quarter-cent RTA sales tax. So that was a surprise. And I just said this to Greg a couple of minutes ago. That's kind of what happens when you negotiate for a year, not off draft language, right? You don't really know what's going to hit. So kudos to everybody here. Mark and I obviously were on the ground running immediately when that dropped, had conversations with the chairman, Bill Blom, immediately.
I bet your ears were burning on the phone so much.
Yeah, I went through a couple portable chargers that day for sure. But the silver lining here is, I mean, the team here, Jeremy and Nick and the chair were great. Very, there were a lot of immediate calls, a lot of conference calls. We were then able to coalesce the collars. So we had all the Collar County chairs, their staff, their lobbyists engaged immediately. And we just started, bless you, we just started working our members. So credit to our coalition of members in the Senate and also our folks in the House on both sides of the aisle were tireless advocates for us and were unwilling to put a vote on a piece of legislation we were opposed to.
Good.
So they were fantastic. So good news is when the Second Amendment came, we were able to get that RTA sales tax taken out of the bill, left as is. Obviously, the impact to the county was catastrophic. And so the version that did pass the Senate was not taken up in the House. That version had a governance structure that was close to something we could live with. We maintained all of our existing picks. And I'll be happy to go through more details offline. I don't want to keep you guys here all day. It was, but we were able to maintain kind of our representation on all the service boards and the parent board. The RTA sales tax was removed, the provision. But I think the reason that bill did not move in the House, there was a disconnect between the House and the Senate about whether to tie a funding source to the legislation. That was not our argument. We were not involved in that whatsoever. That, quite frankly, didn't really impact us in that sense. We were just focused on protecting our representation and, quite frankly, our $70 billion that we generate. So that bill did pass the Senate probably around 11:30 or so at night on the 31st and was not taken up in the House. So what does that mean moving forward? That means we're not done with this. So we'll spend the summer kind of staying close to it because when things you don't like are taken out, you're always worried they're going to be put back in. From an operational perspective, that bill was a House bill in the Senate that they amended. So the House can either concur or not concur. They can't amend it. So what I would imagine is over the course of the summer, you're going to have some negotiations between the House members and the Senate members that were running this, and they'll run a clean product. Probably in October. They just announced the veto session dates earlier today. That's the timing that has to hit for that fiscal cliff.
Okay, so they're not gonna meet this summer then, you think? Because I mean,
There's some chatter about that.
they've been putting, they meaning Metro Pay CTA, the RTA has been putting a lot of money into advertising that
Yes.
the world is gonna end here in a minute
Well,
regarding transportation.
I mean, there's a couple different schools of thought, depends on who you talk to, right? So some folks at the CTA say you're worth 60 days away from cuts. I don't know if that's true or not. I honestly don't.
What was kind of the thought on dumping on the collar counties? Because we use public transportation less than, say, the urban counties.
And I don't know if that, and Mark is obviously was heavily in these negotiations with me and did a fantastic job and can feel free to step in if I misspeak on anything, but I don't know that it was necessarily dump on the collar counties. I don't think that the chairman of the transportation and the committee in the Senate who was advocating for this had that in his thought process. I certainly don't think in any of the conversations that I've had with him was not his intention. I think the reality is you had the fiscal cliff, which is the fiscal cliff, right? And you have more ridership in the city than you do out here. And I think there's a view from folks in the city that the collar counties are paved in gold and they can absorb things.
Yeah.
And, that's just people looking out their window and not understanding what real life looks like, right? So I think those all factored in, but I do think it was where we ended up was very thoughtful of the collars. I think there was an acknowledgement by folks that collars are important to the transit system. This can't just be a CTA bailout. And, that kind of came to fruition, right? So the fear of the collars was always the takeover of the board, right? And I think there was a solution put forth to kind of backstop that. So Mark, I know you're on.
Yeah, Mark
Zoom.
wants to speak with us. Mark, I'm sorry, you're stuck in Iowa.
Yeah, good afternoon. Sorry about that. I would have loved to have been there in person, but I am enjoying the state of Iowa today. It's something. So just a little more color on the county situation. So the concern, I think, from the Senate President's office, or at least from the Senate themselves, was that counties have been using this RTA 0.25% on things other than transit and other than transportation. And so it took a little time to kind of sort of explain after this bill dropped that was part of a 17-year-old negotiation. Like when the 0.25% was passed in Springfield, there was a line in there that allowed counties to use those funds for transit, transportation, public safety, right? And then it went on. And at least interviewing some folks on their recollection of a 17-year-old vote, people recalled that they were trying to get some Republican votes on that 0.25%. And in order to get it, they added this public safety aspect of it, which allowed you to fund the sheriff's office or build the jail or build the courthouse or those types of things that were related to public safety. So, short memory from people, because 17 years later, here, that was the concern, was that, they don't like the fact that counties are using it for that. We pointed out that counties are using it that way because it's a lawful purpose under the statute. Nobody's doing anything wrong. Nobody's doing anything nefarious. No one's doing anything behind the scenes. In fact, it's quite open. And, DuPage, albeit has a large portion of the budget that is underpinned by this funding, there are other counties that actually have bonding problems that if you were to take that money, it is actually used as part of the revenue source to bonds. So even more significant there. So we pointed all these things out. It was a negotiation nearly 2 decades ago. Here's why it exists. And in any event, we were successful at being able to get that removed. Again, going into the October veto session, everything's fair game, unless the House is going to take up that bill and vote on it on concurrence, which I would say is highly unlikely. All revenue sources are back on the table, including not only the county money, what also affects DuPage County is the toll roads. There was also an attempt to put a 50-cent surcharge on the toll roads, which basically has a bunch of suburban folks running the toll roads, paying a 50-cent surcharge that goes into the new NETA board that funds everything from PACE to Metra to RTA or the new NETA board, as well as CTA. So, we were able to fend that off as well, mainly on the bonding component, that the indenture documents that bondholders hold for the tollway for holding the debt. There is a provision in there that only allows revenue sources from the toll road to be used for the toll road. So we're able to fend that off as well. So, two things we have to fend off, but, the other thing that was in the revenue sources, so it was 3 parts. One was the $1.50 excluding 59 items that are otherwise excluded under the sales tax provisions, things like medications or groceries.
Mark? Hey, Mark? I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind you started to say there are 3 spokes to the process and then you broke up. Could you start from the 3
Oh, sorry.
spokes?
So the 3 pieces of revenue were, one, a $1.50 delivery fee. on anything delivered in the state. There's about 744 million deliveries that occur in the state of Illinois. So for every dollar you put on that, you raise $744 million. Things that are excluded from that are things that are otherwise excluded under the sales tax act. So there's about 59 items, including groceries, prescription drugs, many things that are excluded under those deliveries. The second thing was a 10% surcharge on rideshare services like Uber and Lyft. So your average trip, $30, you're going to pay $33 now with a 10% surcharge on it. And the third one that affected DuPage County and all of the Collier counties was the city of Chicago and several DuPage cities have a real estate transfer tax already imposed. This allowed the new RTA board called NETA to impose a Cook County and Collier County real estate transfer tax of $1.50 per $500 of sales. And so when you bought or sold a property in DuPage, on $1 million property, you would pay about $3,000 in a real estate transfer tax. Those were the three main sources of revenue that generated about $1.3 billion for this new NETA board to take care of mass transit. So, those as well as the tollway and the road fund and county 0.25% tax. I mean, all of those things are going to continue to be discussed for the House and the Senate to come to some revenue package that they can now, by the way, get 36 in the Senate instead of 30 and 71 in the House instead of 60. So you need super majorities now to pass this revenue source in October if it has an immediate effectiveness. So that's where we're at with transit.
All right, anything else you want to talk about besides transit, Mark?
No, I think Chip covered it. Chip, did you cover the energy discussions too?
No, I didn't go through the energy bill, Mark.
Yeah, so I would say with that's the only other like unfinished business is the energy. There was 5 iterations, 5 amendments in the last 48 hours on energy. So trying to pass a battery storage so that when renewables generate energy, they can actually store them in the battery storage and then deliver them to the grid. There's like peak demand and that type of thing. Without battery storage, we will not meet our CEJA 2030, 2035 goals of renewable energy. So that still remains out there. There were a number of things on nuclear power. There were a number of things on data centers that were in that bill. Many things changed throughout the 5 amendments, but back to the drawing board and back in October to get an energy package passed in Springfield as well. So unlike most veto sessions where the governor vetoes very few, if any, bills because it's super majorities of Democrats, this is going to be quite a bonanza of a veto session. I can't imagine canceled days, and I can't imagine some long nights there for veto session to get energy, some discussions on tier 2 pensions, which I don't anticipate will move in October, and then public transportation as well. So it's going to be a busy October.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to open it up for questions for both of you. And I saw Member Galassi's hand first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just so the 3 tax revenue options are the delivery tax. Was the second one the increase in toll?
Second one was the rideshare service fee.
Oh, rideshare service fee. Okay. And then the third one was the transfer tax and real estate. What is our position on those 3?
We have taken a position that our position on revenue is do not come after our 1/4 cent sales tax and do not raid our motor fuel tax that we are already getting. So that would be our official position. We're looking at these and analyzing them and going to see what the actual impact is. One thing that Mark did leave out in the amendment on the real estate transfer tax, we would collect that right now, the way it's written. We would collect it, hold the money. So we would make interest on that money as we're holding it. And it would be given over to the NETA board through an IGA. So there is some local control over that tax. Is that a fair assessment, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And again, you could see where the county would not necessarily be opposed to a real estate transfer tax. And it also allows the NETA board to decide whether it's on the buyer, the seller, or split between the buyer and the seller. So again, the example is the city of Naperville, for example, I think has roughly that type of a transfer tax. So in order to close, you have to get the stamp from the city of Naperville that you've paid the real estate transfer tax. I believe it's all on the buyer in Naperville, so that the buyer pays the entire transfer tax, moving into the city, and then the person leaving doesn't pay anything. But you can see where, depending on how long you were able to hold on to that, it's a significant amount of money, and you could generate a significant amount of interest. And again, you're not the one imposing the tax, right? It's the NITA board imposing the tax.
So we are looking at this, and how this would actually work out. And we can give you more information when we have an idea on that. But again, Mark is correct, we're simply collecting the tax. We're not the one imposing it.
Sure.
So,
So, I've just heard a lot of, negative feedback from real estate agents about that, of course, because it's could, affect their business. So you're saying we haven't taken a position? Will we, or are we just gonna stay neutral on these?
we're gonna take a look and see what this does to the county, and obviously we'll convene a meeting and discuss that.
All right, any other questions? No other questions? It was a long session, Member Garcia.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of bills on here to go through, and there's so many, and you're saying, in your estimation, I mean, how many do you think they're gonna get to in October? I mean, there's so many good ones here that.
I don't really know the answer to that. Not a significant amount,
Okay.
right? I mean, you're gonna have
7,000.
heavy issues.
That's awesome. I heard that.
7,000.
Okay,
Excellent.
great. Cause, there's about 7,000 I like.
Yeah.
Okay. So once, just so I'm clear, once October is gone, then they have to start over from square one, correct?
So everything stays alive for the duration of the General Assembly. We're in the first year of the 2 years.
Okay.
So none of those go away per se until the inauguration of the new General Assembly in another year.
2026.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they
okay.
could be-
So we have a little more time.
Yeah, they could be
Okay.
reactivated, nothing, as we say, nothing's ever really dead.
Okay, and I really appreciate you kind of engaging with our state reps and state senators. I know I was on the phone with a lot of them, and there was a lot of them that didn't realize that in 2008, this stuff
Sure.
was passed. And so now I think we're all on the same page. And so, that was good to know. And so hopefully they're willing to actually not reconsider the change in our $72 million.
We had a lot of support from our DuPage members on
Yeah,
that issue.
good. Glad to hear that.
Member Rowley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say thank you to Chip and Mark and the staff here at DuPage, on the county side for working diligently. I know, as Member Garcia said, I was also on the phone with some reps and senators, and I think to echo your comments about what happened in 2008, I think there was still some, things going on that would needed to be addressed to understand the full, capacity of what that bill as written would have done. But I guess I have one question, either Chip or Mark. You mentioned, Mark, tier 2 pensions. Was that like a very drawn out discussion that was leading somewhere, or was that somewhere that was going to be picked up again in the fall?
So that conversation is supposed to be picked up. It's obviously a major price tag on tier 2 pension reform, but I would say this, there was an outline of the parameters of negotiations that were laid out, late last year. And I believe that the AFL-CIO and the CFL, Chicago Federation of Labor, and the folks in labor who negotiated believed that they were within the confines of that outline, and it proposed tier 2 pension reform that did not cost new revenue money. Unfortunately, as we got to last week, there was a differing of opinion between labor and the governor's office, and essentially the working groups were scrapped and tier 2 pensions were dropped. So I would anticipate that there will be some discussions in the fall, but this will likely be picked up in earnest in the spring, and some very serious discussions over tier 2 pensions will be starting starting in January of next year. So I don't think that those will, go very far in October, mainly because you do have two major tier two pensions, certainly there's something's got to be done to get fixed. You got a shortage of teachers and, IDOT's down, 1,200 employee headcount and can't get all the projects out on time. So there's a number of problems there, but the fiscal cliff for public transportation, for those that rely on that, is a major looming problem that is coming up. It will be a crisis by the end of the year. And then also energy. I mean, that is also a looming crisis. You have a bunch of renewable projects that are literally have a number of kilowatt hours of stranded energy, meaning, you're not turning the wind turbine because there's nowhere to put the energy, right? When we could be storing that in a battery storage facility and then delivering that to the grid to meet our CG goals. So those two things are kind of sort of reaching a crisis mode. So I would anticipate we're only scheduled for 6 days in October. And we're talking about getting through a major energy bill that had 5 amendments in 48 hours and couldn't get across the finish line, and passing a bill that has revenue somewhere in the neighborhood of 750 million to 1.5 billion. So that's an awful lot to bite off in 6 days. So I don't anticipate much more other than that.
Thank you, Mark.
Member Osai.
I just want to remind the board, speaking about the RTA tax, last year was the first time since I think 2008 when it was passed, $2 million went to transportation instead of or as well as public safety. So I really hope that when we're doing our budget preparations, we can keep that 2 million going to transportation.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add on this October date, it's no mistake that they scheduled this session for the 2nd and 4th week of October. The federal budget, or presumably this reconciliation bill and the budget will be passed that will go into effect on October 1st. All indications are that we are going to have a major crisis in terms of people being kicked off the Medicaid rolls. And a number of other pieces potentially that are going to affect the state of Illinois. So with that said, not only are we coming into October session to talk about energy and public transportation, we are likely to also be staring down the barrel of what do we do with, I don't know the number yet, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 to 1 million people that will no longer have health insurance through Medicaid. So
Member Osai still has the floor.
Okay, I have another question. With this big, beautiful bill that everyone's hearing everything about, I tried to personally do some Google searching about effective dates. And it sounds like you're thinking that the Medicaid element of it could be very quick. It seems like a lot of it, though, could be held off. Do you have a sense of how much impact we would feel virtually immediately besides Medicaid?
Let's all cross our fingers. We've got 3 weeks. Next week is committee markups. The following week is amendments. And so essentially what happens there'll be committee amendments in that next week. The following week is like the week of the 23rd. That is where Democrats will have the opportunity to go through and strike through anything that they believe to be not, quote, budget related, because in this big, beautiful bill, it all has to be budget related or it gets stricken from it. So there will be a bunch of parliamentarian moves that week by the Democrats to try to exclude a number of things that are not budgetary related. And then the following week, just prior to the 4th of July, is when there's likely a vote. So all indications are that is the timeline, and it has been condensed a bit because we're running out of time with the debt ceiling and all that. But I do anticipate that we are going to see a major reformed big, beautiful bill in the Senate that will be delivered back to the House. That's what I anticipate. So stay tuned over the next 3 weeks.
But I don't think I don't know if you quite answered my question. Effective dates, I was having a really hard time, just any kind of, when do these things become effective?
We've
Is
got
it?
our federal.
Well, that's
Okay, sorry.
well,
Is it,
that was
is
the-
it next week or is it the end of this year or is it?
It depends on the committee markups, and it depends if a lot of this stuff actually stays in there after the
Okay.
Democrats are able to exclude these things. So that's why I say, like, by July 4th, we should know
Okay,
exactly what the implications are going to be and what the timeline is going to be by the 4th of July on what the other thought here too is whatever happens in the Senate, is going to be a drastic departure from the House, but the
Yeah.
House will then vote on what the Senate returns to them. That we don't anticipate a bunch of markup from the House.
And I'm not blaming you for the futility of my Google search, so
Right. Yeah,
I'm really
I
not
know.
sure what I was looking for, but I was not finding any dates, so.
Yep.
We should know a lot more in October.
Member Garcia?
Yeah,
Thank
just a
you.
real- Something really quickly, I was taking like screenshots of Chip's wonderful report last night. Because I'm just like, there's so much good in here, so I would love if we would have, some time to talk about what did happen. I mean, it looks like there's mental health, there were some things that were passed on that. So if you have a chance, read through it, because there were some really good things that happened in this, and I just wanted to say that, I know we're sitting here talking doom and gloom, that's just our world right now. But I think we got some really good work done, or they did, in the Springfield this year, so just want to make sure if everybody's aware of that, so.
More questions?
Just to plug our internal end of session report, it's not as great as Chip's big beautiful report.
It is.
We went to 17, we went to 7 pages, but all of the legislation that passed that was in line with our legislative agenda is in there next to the legislative agenda item. So that you can.
I'll
see-
read that more closely.
Yes.
I was trying to get through Chip.
Questions?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
And Jeremy, if you could hand him the one that Chip's report, please.
Okay.
Okay, final questions? Thank you both for being here, really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Any final remarks you'd like to make, Chip, about the legislative session?
No.
Glad it's over.
Would you come back in late September to tell us about what's ahead
I will come
for
back whenever you want.
the October session? Okay, thank
Whenever
you.
How many portable chargers do you own?
Well, I threw away 2 out of frustration during session, so I'm down to 1 now.
And Mark, would you come back too in like the end of September?
Certainly will, Chairwoman. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Thank you both.
Thanks,
very much.
everyone.
So
Bye-bye.
Jeremy, would you get these guys on a September agenda?
Yes,
Thank you, sir. Okay, next. Fabulous. Did you bring a crystal ball? Because not a lot's happening there. I want to welcome Greg Bales. He's been DuPage County's federal lobbyist for over a year now. He serves the county through McGuire Wood Consulting. Before joining the firm, Greg worked for Senator Dick Durbin, who we all love, for more than a decade. And before working with Senator Durbin, Greg worked as a policy advisor for the Illinois Department of Transportation. So we welcome Greg Bales to talk about what's going on in Washington. Is there anything going on in Washington? Because I don't think Congress is doing all that much.
It's kind of hard to talk about smaller items when there are some big ticket things really dominating the agenda at the moment. As far as implementation dates for some of the things in the reconciliation package, it's a moving target. Some start as early as calendar year 2026 from January 1st. Some have delayed implementation. I remind you, a lot of the things in the big beautiful bill are extensions of the 2017 tax package that was
Yes.
passed.
You really
So
think that we adults would be saying big, beautiful bill?
No.
No. Anyway, go
How
on,
about
I'm
B
sorry.
cubed, so we don't have to say
is,
that.
I guess they do this less in Springfield, but boy, in Congress, they love to have cute names attached to. I mean, things turn into acronyms.
Pretty quickly.
So the big 3 things, I guess, right? Reconciliation package, the budget and appropriations process, and then, a real timely thing is a rescissions package that the Congress is debating. And the rescissions package is an attempt to codify things that came out from some early on cuts that were made by DuPage, which I actually don't remember. What does that stand for? Government efficiency?
Government efficiency.
And so that's supposed to happen this week. DuPage is about a $9 billion package to, again, codify some cuts that were made at various federal agencies. Let's maybe start though on a high note, I think.
Yes.
On the appropriations process. So as was mentioned earlier, September 30th of this year is the deadline when fiscal year 25 ends. So Congress needs to pass what should traditionally be 12 standalone appropriation bills. It's been a while since we've done that, past 12 individual appropriation packages. And what I mean by the 12 is one is for labor, health, and human services, one's for Department of Transportation, one's for commerce, justice, and science. And within these bills, it funds the various agencies that those committees or subcommittees within the Appropriations Committee cover. What we traditionally seem to do the past few years is pass either an omnibus package, just lump it all in one bill. Or we did in fiscal year 24, 2 mini buses, new term. And that's what they did, 6 bills and 6 bills and lump them together. Fiscal year 25, I love the terms. Was it a cromnibus, which is a continuing resolution / omnibus? It was really a cromnibus because it was a CR, if you will, a continuing resolution of a lot of fiscal year 24 funding levels with some modifications made, and therefore it's an omnibus. So we are now in the process. The House is moving faster than the Senate and marking up and holding hearings in the Appropriations Committee on those 12 bills. So they're moving apace. I mean, just today, there's a full committee hearing in the Appropriations Committee on one of them. So this is good as far as the House goes. Senator Collins from Maine is the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. Just was discussing that it's going to take a while for an agreement to come together between what they would call the four corners. The four corners of the Appropriations Committee are the chairs. In the House, it's Chairman Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma. The Senate, it's Chair Susan Collins of Maine. And then you have the minority leaders, Democratic side. The top line spending levels is what they need to come to an agreement on. Those top line spending levels are then how they determine how much money to appropriate in these 12 bills. Mind you, a little civics lesson, they appropriate the money that the other committees have authorized. So these other committees, they determine, we want to create a program that spends money to help counties. Well, that's ambiguous, and then the Appropriations Committee determines how much money should support that. So we are in the appropriations process now. I don't have a good estimate right now on what the Senate's going to do as far as timeline. They need to come to this agreement, then they'll start having subcommittee hearings, they'll have subcommittee or full committee markups. Another civics lesson, you've all maybe heard about the president releasing his FY26 budget. It has some significant increases and decreases. You're looking at approximately 22% decreases in what they call non-defense discretionary spending. And it has about, I write down, 13% increases in defense and discretionary defense spending. So you're seeing cuts and increases across the board. I mean, it is a long list I won't go through today of where they're doing increases and decreases. But that discretionary non-defense stuff is things like HUD, Department of Energy, Department of Labor. You're just seeing, and that's what Mark Polis was talking about earlier, the state may have to make some decisions based on if and what Congress does in both the appropriations packages as well as the reconciliation bill. So we're monitoring this closely. I know I said high note. The high note I wanted to bring up is part of what we worked on for the county is this appropriations process. And fiscal year 25 was a disappointment because when they passed a cromnibus, they did not include what they call tables or line item spending in some of these packages. It was just generic spending allocated agencies. And so all the projects we worked to secure for the county, everyone in the country didn't get their project. It wasn't just the county, it was all line items were washed. So it wasn't, and these are just a big incident. I mean, they had to rush to get the bill done in time. So we're in FY26. We so far have some early good news coming from Congressman Foster and Congresswoman Ramirez's office. They have submitted 2 projects for the county to date. So we have $4.1 million. They're submitting for the 3rd Avenue Stormwater projects and $750,000 for the 91st Street infrastructure project. So this is the good first step. They submit these projects to the committee. Subcommittee has a markup, full committee has a markup. The bill passes, they release what they call in the House community project funding table, and then we'll know if our project was included. But we're on the right track, and they had to disclose what they submitted, and so it's a big win right now that we have those 2 projects submitted. There's different deadlines for disclosure. We'll know more from the other members that we worked with to submit projects. So that's some early good news. Let's talk about reconciliation. That's appropriations. We've got until September 30th. Things are happening. May 22nd, the House passed their budget reconciliation package. 215 to 214 was the vote. 2 Republicans voted no, along with the 214 Democrats. And now we are waiting on the Senate to release their text for the package. Budget reconciliation is an interesting process. The big reason they do it is you do not need a veto-proof majority in the Senate. So as it stands, the Republicans could lose 3 votes and still pass the bill with the vice president being a tiebreaker. So, and what Mark noted when it comes to parliamentary process is there's a thing called the Byrd Rule, named after Robert C. Byrd. And it restricts non-budgetary items from being included in the package. The House has some things that are being discussed as being non-budgetary. Something that's been on people's radar is some provision as it relates to preempting states from having any laws or rules relating to artificial intelligence. This has come up in some counties, even if you know, what is it? Do you have a rule as it relates to how you use or restrict AI in any of your policies or processes? And if this remains in the package, would it prevent you from keeping those rules on the books? Some national organizations such as the National Council of League of Cities is opposed. So you're seeing these entities oppose us. We'll see if the Senate parliamentarian strikes these provisions from the Senate. Again, as noted earlier, I have a different opinion about how different the Senate package would be. You have such a tight majority in the House that if the Senate makes substantial changes to the reconciliation package, it may be harder to, pun intended, I guess, reconcile it with the House. You know, a thing of note that I kind of relevant to DuPage is the state and local tax deduction is included in this bill. And there are Republicans and Democrats that want to increase the cap from 10,000. And the number right now that they included is 40,000.
Nice.
It'd be great.
Yes.
Also costs the federal government a lot if you include that. And so if you've seen some of these nonpartisan reports on the cost of the reconciliation package, you're seeing a spectrum from 2.9 trillion to 3.7, over 10 years. And so if they keep that $40,000 increase, how much more will that expand the cost of the package? The White House is projecting somewhere upwards of 2 trillion in revenue on, they're factoring in tariffs and other things. So mix that in with this bill. They're seeing better estimates over 10 years. Hard to say. So what the Senate will do, we're going to see over the coming weeks. They've set their own arbitrary deadline to get it done. We'll see if any Republican senators peel off. I mean, I think every Democratic senator is going to vote no on the package. So that is happening in real time. We're monitoring it, giving reports. On the Medicaid front, there are some concerning items in there as it relates to the state and local health departments. The tact that the House Republicans took on the package was to implement new re-enrollment processes and work requirements. And so the argument is made that we are not cutting benefits, we are just trying to address waste, fraud, and abuse. And so, but what the Congressional Budget Office is estimating is you could see upwards of 7.7 million people losing their health insurance by 2034. The estimated savings or deficit reduction is upwards of 912 billion from these very specific Medicaid and healthcare changes. I've heard some rosy depictions of what it could mean for the Illinois budget. Interestingly, you could make the case that by including these re-enrollment processes and workplace requirements and other verification steps, that you have fewer people on the rolls, therefore it costs the state less money. You can call it a half-class full interpretation of what it means. There are various measures they're taking when it comes to Medicaid. We have a whole memo on what it might mean. There's a provision in there that says if your state provides healthcare to undocumented workers and you use infrastructure that is funded via Medicaid, so whatever the state structure we use in Illinois, your state would see an increase or a decrease by 10% of your FMAP allocation. The FMAP is how they determine how much money the feds match your state contribution to Medicaid program. So this leads into something I'll talk about a little bit more, and I feel I'm getting a little long-winded, but there are some measures being taken by the administration and the current Congress that are sort of forcing, I think, state and local governments to make decisions that maybe they wouldn't want to normally. That's one of them. You know, basically the state decided we cannot pay for health insurance for undocumented residents because of this. So I feel like I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what's in the reconciliation package. I mean, it is massive. I'm not gonna, we share some updates with highlights and lowlights from it. But those are the big three things: appropriations, reconciliation, rescission. I'll close on another, maybe a highlight. I was in a briefing with the U.S. Department of Transportation the other week. It's one of the a few agencies that's actually moving forward on restarting, reopening grant and funding programs. And in the reconciliation package, you are seeing proposed increases, and in the president's budget, more increases for the Department of Transportation for certain programs. So you will see grant opportunities there. I think that's good, particularly for large local governments that pursue those programs. Some interesting policy priorities from the Secretary Duffy at DOT. They want to see more innovation in applications. You know, how would you use AI? How would you use drones to change your transportation policy? A prioritization of families is an interesting one. The family ones is they may prioritize applications that have higher birth rates and higher marriage rates. I was in a conversation with some folks on the Hill yesterday, or not, the other week, and they were talking about, you can look at this two ways. You know, that families thing is where, again, where do you see more economic development? Where do you see growth? Where do you see need? But it could also be interpreted as, are there communities that have higher birth rate that we may have traditionally prioritized as disadvantaged, but by default now we will target them through the families category or lens as having higher birth rates. So a lot going on there too. But again, I think the DOT thing is good. You may hopefully see other agencies start to reopen funding programs, but it's been a touch chaotic these first few months. And even with all the executive orders and all the administrative changes, you also see a lot of things being held up by the courts. For example, the $11 billion in state and local healthcare funding from the HHS and CDC. The courts just the other month ordered a preliminary injunction. I forget, temporary restraining order, preliminary injunction, compelling HHS and CDC to keep this money flowing. So sometimes you'll read something is happening, but then the courts overturn it, so then it keeps going. So let me stop.
Thank you
And
so
try
much.
to
Thank
answer
you,
some
thank you,
questions.
thank you. Let's go with Member Rutledge.
Thank you, Chair Dessart. I'm not on the committee, but thanks for coming, Greg. So what's the impact of this Rep. Green, Congressman Green stepping down yesterday? Now they're split vote, and does that make things harder to get through? And my second question is, did you really just say that they're going to prioritize, I'm sorry to have to say it like this, rich white areas for funding so that they would procreate as opposed to funding disadvantaged areas? I think the other way around.
It could be seen as both ways. And it's very to be determined. I have not seen this language incorporated in any notice of funding opportunities yet, so.
Wanted to be sure I understood.
But you
what
said
were-
you proposed that it was the other way.
You could, there are talks that you can interpret it both ways.
You had another
Interesting.
question?
And then the impact of the congressman stepping down, and virtually now we're a tie vote in the.
See, I mean, you have people that have been out for sickness and other things, and
Okay.
so it ebbs and flows.
Member
I
Olson.
think we just have a pending appointment on the Democratic side still.
Okay.
Member Olson.
That, using transportation, population growth, family criteria, has that ever been instituted before?
I've not seen it, no.
Okay. Because I think it is interesting to know, that I think Mr. Duffy is from Madison. He has 9 kids, I believe.
9 children.
However, you're gonna find a real problem in college communities, because you're not gonna generally have a vast majority of the people are not procreating at
Well,
that
rural
moment,
America.
or hopefully are not. So Very strange.
It would be one of many factors, you know, on these
Sure,
funding
but it's a
opportunities, they
very-
really score them. And
Creative factor,
Yeah.
no pun intended.
Member Childress.
Yes. Has there been any talk or discussion at all around the census? We are now halfway through 2025. It's 4.5 years. Count every single human being in this country. That affects districts, money going to counties, money going into the different cities, roads. It affects everything. And I'm not hearing anything around the census at all. And I don't know if we got enough time to even get it done, or do they even care if we get it done?
You know, I haven't seen anything, doesn't mean it isn't being worked on or talked about. Let me look, get that.
Yeah. See if the department's still open.
Yeah.
Member Garcia.
Yeah, two things. One, and maybe you don't have an answer to this, I'm probably sure, but I'm very frustrated that they can't do their votes like we do on our county board, item per item per item, so that everybody can be very transparent on what their votes are, instead of doing this omnibus, minibus, whatever bus they're on, I don't know, but that to me, and I know it's not an answer to give me, but I get a lot of people complaining to me like, why can't they vote like that? I mean, why can't they sit there and take a vote on that one item? I don't understand that. Number two, I'm very concerned for our community services. I want to know what the funding is going to be, what the funding, the word is on the funding on coming down for our health and human services to help with our community services and all the people who are in need in DuPage County, from line heap to weatherization to our affordable housing. I mean, where do we stand on the funding coming to Illinois? Because my frustration is, you know, we're gonna give funding back to the federal government, but, you know, I'm to the point where it's like, we need it here in Illinois. I would prefer to give it to the people who are in need. That's just something
Oh, yeah, there was a $4 billion, I had pulled this up and I'm sitting down, in the president's budget, the $4 billion proposed reduction in life.
Yeah.
to me, it's ridiculous, just ridiculous. Come
4
live in
billion
the
decrease.
Chicago winter, you know, for a little while and get out of our lot.
3.5 billion decrease for CDC.
Yeah.
$674 million decrease for CMS, which is the Medicare and Medicaid services.
Mhm.
This is one that, not social services related, but the proposed cuts, and I'll be really curious to see what House Republicans do in the appropriations processes. The proposed cuts to the state revolving loan fund for sewage and drinking water. That money capitalizes the state revolving loan fund that they loan out to local government to replace sewer lines, water lines, lead lines. It's the number one way, I mean, that we pay for this stuff nationally and locally. And they zero it out.
We're zeroing out our clean water.
And they actually seed money in this proposed budget now for states to develop plans to come up with new funding sources. But it's the number one program that local units of government use really to pay for large infrastructure projects for water and sewer, where you either get a 0% loan or you get a loan forgiveness if you're a
Right.
disadvantaged community. And
Mhm.
I mean, that one's on the chopping block, but
South suburbs are on a water issue right now. Did you see that in the news?
University Park.
Yeah, University Park, they're all getting bottled water and then you can't even boil it because it's all runoff from fertilizer. It's
Only
like
for
6 communities.
children and elderly, but I find that it's such an arbitrary threshold personally that I
Yeah.
don't think.
What's that?
They have it
Go ahead
set,
and drink fertilizer, it's fine.
if you're not
Unless you're a
below a certain
baby,
age or senior,
Don't
senior.
don't make baby formula with it.
So if
That's
you're
all
like-
I need to hear.
If you're like 50, they're like, sure, go ahead and drink it, but if you're 2, don't.
I'm
thinking,
gonna go-
No, I understand.
Don't fast.
That was an interesting,
that's me being a little knee jerk.
Member Garcia, what do you say?
concerning.
Well, I mean, just if we can continue to follow up on that, because I'm very concerned with those, our staff here, number one, and the people who are in need in DuPage County, so.
Number one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate very much your due diligence. You've given us so much information that I, didn't know, and, there's only so much that we can read and understand without a follow-up from Greg or Chip or Jeremy. But I think it's amazing that you are doing that due diligence, because there are plenty of people in Congress that are quite frankly shocked that they didn't realized that there was something in there that they voted for, like the AI provision. And I think that, you know, that kind of discrepancy can cost people lives. And I appreciate everyone here that we are a county that values, food insecurity, housing, and, you know, making sure that, you know, the things that are happening in DC are being relayed in such a concise manner that we understand it. And, you know, to Paula's point is that, you know, all these things, these maybe little to them on, you know, on the Hill and in the White House are huge to us. And the amount of, you know, I think you were talking about, I just saw that the president was talking about $1,000 credit for, you know, and I don't know if that was to your point of we were talking about targeting certain communities with that, but and then, you know, cutting $4 billion to LIHEAP, you know, you get a credit for $1,000 for giving birth. And then they simply don't care about after you were born. So it's very interesting to me, and but I appreciate everything that you're doing to keep us up to date. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I just wanted to narrow down your point that the budget will be passed by July 4th. Is that what you said earlier?
That was Mark's prediction.
Oh, that
on
was
the
Mark's prediction, because
the
I
reconciliation
heard
process.
that, and I could be wrong, but what I heard is that if the Senate makes changes to the budget, it has to go back through the House. So it's probably not gonna be done in 3 weeks, right?
It is, this is the crystal ball thing, and I
Yeah, I
always,
know, I'm
I
sorry.
find it's also sometimes confusing when we talk about budget reconciliation and then the appropriations process to pay for the budget. The budget reconciliation process, they've set an arbitrary deadline. We'll see if they can meet it. The White House and the administration is working closely with Speaker Johnson and Senator Thune to work with members to address their concerns. So I feel like they will get it done. I feel like with the political work they'll do, but I don't know what date.
You have a crystal ball?
We do have the September 30th deadline for appropriations, so we know that's sort of a must do, but they're gonna wanna get reconciliation done before that.
Besides the budget, it seems like everything is coming from the executive branch. To me, just as a normal news viewer, everything is coming from the executive branch. And it doesn't sound like Congress, the Senate, and the House are doing a lot. So besides passing a budget, what else is Congress working on right now?
Yeah, it can be hard to keep track of because they are having some committee hearings and moving on other bills. They're working on some stuff related to cryptocurrency that seems to be garnering bipartisan support. The Veterans Committee has been marking up some bills, just, you know, tweaks and things for veterans programs at the VA and the like, and what you will likely see, you know, my experience, for example, in the VA and the veterans world is the committee will move forward and start marking things up, and then they'll put them all to some chagrin, they'll put them in a package. You know, and they did it last Congress, they called it the Elizabeth Dole Act, and it was, you know, it was a mismatch of probably a dozen, 24 various components of other bills that, for veterans. So there's some other things happening, they just don't make the limelight like executive orders do.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know of any initiatives that our Congress people in DuPage County are doing? Caston, Underwood, Foster? Oh, okay. Ramirez, I'm sorry, yes. Okay, that's right. I don't want to.
You know, I feel like Caston typically has a lot of bills he pushes out. But yeah, we'll pull together a little list, see what they're working.
Final questions? All right, Mr. Bales, thank you so much for being here in
Thank you.
person. We always love to see you, and you're always welcome to any legislative committee meetings. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
I wanted to ask real quick, Lisa, because I've got these two, I need to do one here.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I got a to-do list.
There's nothing else to discuss here? No. Okay, good. Old business. New business. All right, without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all for being here.